Let us begin our service. As we gather this morning, let us remind ourselves of the covenants that we make with one another and together. Let us recite BUC's covenant. As part of this beloved community, I promise to strive to be my best self in all my interactions, assume the best intentions of everyone's actions, be mindful of our shared humanity in my communications, pause, reflect, and be part of the solution when things go awry. Thus do we covenant with one another.
Good morning, Birmingham Unitarian Church. Good morning. Oh, come on, I only heard it over here. Everybody together. Good morning. Good morning. There we go. It is very good to be with you on this beautiful day. Whether you are joining us here in the sanctuary, joining us on Zoom, or watching recording later, or joining us here for the first time, welcome. Good to be with you. It is important to build a bridge between us here in person and those online. So I'd like to take a moment and tell everybody to take a look at the camera right back over there. Give a smile and a wave to everybody up on Zoom. And now that we've energized them with our smiles, we are going to have them broadcast up here. More coming? All right. For those of us gathered here in person, we will be having a coffee hour after. Please feel free to join us for some conversation. Free coffee, always good, even if you don't want to talk. We would look forward to seeing you. Wherever and however we connect with BUC, we are building BUC. At home, on campus, in the world, every day, we are Birmingham Unitarian Church. And we are building the beloved community. We light today's chalice. We light this chalice with an open heart. We light this chalice with resolve. We light this chalice with tears still fresh on our cheeks. We light this chalice in hope. Tiny flame we nurture. We light this chalice with reverence for this place, these people, to be who we are, to be who we will become, to be ourselves. We light this chalice in self-love, in giving love, in holy love. Now our first hymn, Wake Now My Senses, number 298 in the gray hymnal.
Feel the deep power of
If you believe that humans have free will, then every moment we are awake is burdened with the weight of decision. To accept the world as it is or to act to change it in some way. Some of these decisions are trivial, like which seat you picked when you walked into the sanctuary this morning. But some are of consequence, like whether to undergo that risky medical procedure your doctor recommends. This morning, when we talk about decisions, it's about those decisions of consequence. It is clear to me that decision-making is a critical part of what it means to be a human. Decision-making has been the subject of investigation by philosophers and sages, priests and poets, and economists and psychologists. Decision-making is enshrined in our UU principles here at BUC in the idea of freedom of conscience for the individual and democratic processes for the community. This morning, we look at the decision-making process and why mere humans struggle so much with decisions.
The mission of Birmingham Unitarian Church is to be a free and welcoming religious institution and community that encourages lives of integrity, The mission of Birmingham Unitarian Church is to be a free and welcoming religious community that encourages lives of integrity, learning, service, and joy. One way we live out this mission is by giving half of our weekly plate offering to a nonprofit organization that shares our values and addresses needs in one of these areas: environmental action, economic justice, civic engagement, and racial justice. We support a new organization each month. Our July plate recipient is Samaritas' Southeast Michigan Refugee Resettlement and Placement Program. Funds will be used towards the resettlement of more than 850 adults and children this year who are fleeing the ravages of war, persecution, violence, and from countries including Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Iraq, Venezuela, and Colombia. They also stand ready to welcome individuals and families from Africa into Southeast Michigan. Please give from your heart. Give in concern for the larger community. Ushers, please come forward. We are a church of open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands. With gratitude, we dedicate this offering to the good works of our congregation and dedicate ourselves to its service. Thank you.
We are at the point in our service when we offer up those things in our lives that give us joy or give us sorrow. This is a spiritual exercise we take as a community to celebrate and to console. We have no online joys this morning, but we have a sorrow, hopefully progressing to a joy from Tom Cranston. Returning from a UP vacation a week ago, Saturday, Jean Cranston tripped and fell, hitting her head. She suffered a minor brain bleed. She's home recovering now. For this and those joys and sorrows we hold in our heart, let us take a moment of silence.
I'm going to try something a little different to see if this is easier for me. It's summer, we can be a little more casual, right? This reading is adapted from an article in the New York Times by Robert D. Hershey, Jr., published March 27th, 2024. Daniel Kahneman, who never took an economics course, but who pioneered a psychologically based branch of that field that led to a Nobel Prize in Economic Science in 2002, died on Wednesday, March 27th, 2024. He was 90. Professor Kahneman, who was long associated with Princeton University and lived in Manhattan, employed his training as a psychologist to advance what came to be called behavioral economics. The work, done largely in the 1970s, led to a rethinking of issues as far-flung as medical malpractice, international political negotiations, and the evolution of baseball talent, all of which he analyzed, mostly in collaboration with Amos Tversky, a Stanford cognitive psychologist who did groundbreaking work on human judgment and decision-making. As opposed to traditional economics, which assumes that human beings generally act in fully rational ways, and find that any exceptions tend to disappear as the stakes are raised, the behavioral school is based on exposing the hardwired mental biases that can warp judgment, often with counterintuitive results. His central message could not be more important, the Harvard psychologist and author Steven Pinker told The Guardian in 2014, namely, that human reason, left to its own devices, is apt to engage in a number of fallacies and systematic errors. So if we want to make better decisions in our personal lives and as a society, we ought to be aware of these biases and see workarounds. That's a powerful and important discovery.
The second reading is from the preface to Spiritually Informed Therapy, Wisdom and Evidence-Based Strategies That Work. This is by Thomas G. Plant, an emeritus adjunct professor of psychology and behavioral sciences at Stanford School of Medicine. Psychotherapists need all the evidence-based intervention tools that they can get to help their clients with a wide range of challenges in their lives. Fortunately, psychotherapy has evolved over the years to be able to provide effective evidence-based strategies for managing anxiety, depression, substance abuse, relationship problems, and so much more. Randomized clinical trials and evidence-based clinical guidelines allow clinicians to practice with confidence. However, clinicians and professional organizations sometimes fail to see the obvious. In their efforts to be completely secular, they too often fail to see that the religious and spiritual communities have developed thoughtful and helpful strategies over many decades and even centuries that can be used outside of their traditions and in secular ways to bring diverse clients with a wide range of psychological, behavioral, and relationship troubles. Every now and then, someone or some group seems to rediscover a strategy from these traditions and then conduct the necessary research and clinical practice interventions in a way that ultimately goes viral and is readily accepted by others. Mindfulness and yoga are both good examples, as they come from ancient spiritual and religious traditions but have been rediscovered in more recent years and successfully adapted for secular audiences. Yet, perhaps mindfulness and yoga are merely just the tip of the iceberg. There are many additional strategies for better living that come from religious and spiritual traditions and are waiting to be rediscovered and translated into professional, contemporary, clinical psychotherapy practice. Have you ever seen a movie where the main character risks everything by taking some bold action that goes against all prevailing wisdom? While the rest of the characters are waiting for the other shoe to drop, the main character is asked, "Why did you do what you did?" And the character says, "I was just following my gut." Typically in the movies, this approach is portrayed as admirable and heroic, and it always ends in a good outcome. That implies that the alternative, using your brain and thinking your way through the decision, is dull, time-consuming, and, well, probably won't work anyway. Now, imagine that you take your child to the pediatrician with a stomach ache. The pediatrician, without any visual or physical evaluation of your child, says, "She needs an immediate appendectomy." You clutch your child to your chest and ask, "What makes you think that?" And the pediatrician says, "I'm just following my gut." You would probably regard that doctor as less than admirable and heroic and be highly doubtful of a good outcome. Now, consider another situation that I'm sure we've all been in, either in work meetings or church meetings or book club or whatever, groups of people. You are part of a group that has to make a decision. Every time you get close to an agreement, somebody brings up an aspect of the option you are about to agree on that seems risky. Usually the comment starts with, "But what about?" And the conversation bounces around to discussion on some other alternative. The process loops through all the alternatives endlessly. This is called the paralysis of analysis. This endless loop is typically broken by somebody, usually somebody with authority, saying, "We will do option A, end of discussion." You may not agree with the directive entirely, but it is a relief to be moving forward. So how should we make decisions? Shoot from the hip and go with your gut, or overthink every aspect of it? Besides movie makers and storytellers, decisions of consequence have been the subject of interest of philosophers and sages, poets and priests, and economists and psychologists. Because my area of academic research was in decision analysis, I have retraced the footsteps of many of these deep thinkers in decision making. This morning, I want to explain some of the intractable aspects of decision making that make it really hard and causes us to gravitate toward one of the extremes of shoot from the hip to get it over with, or to overthink it to avoid a bad outcome. Now, I'm not a self-help guru, so I don't propose to give you the recipe for good decision-making. But I think if you recognize some of the blind spots in these areas, it makes it easier to find your own workarounds, or at the very least, to take the pressure off by knowing that we are faced with huge obstacles in making decisions. And it's not the outcome that governs a good decision. It's getting around your blind spots. I'll go through these blind spots by going through the steps of making a good decision. There are 4 steps to making a decision. First is identify the feasible alternative actions available to you. Second is predict the outcomes of those actions that are available to you. Third, put the outcomes in the order of your preference. And fourth, take action on the action that has the outcome of highest preference. Sounds really simple. But let's look at the challenges for each of these steps. To come up with feasible alternatives, you have to have knowledge of the subject. If it's deciding on a different bridge design, you probably should know something about civil engineering to identify what is feasible. Frequently, we simply don't have the knowledge we need. In this case, we have to rely on experts. Depending on the area of the decision, it might be a doctor you trust for a medical decision, a credible news outlet for a political choice, even a loved one who knows you well for a personal decision like moving to another city. The pitfall here is that because we don't have enough knowledge, we sometimes include in our set of feasible alternatives those that we wish were feasible, but aren't really. That really complicates the other steps. The second step, predicting the outcome of an action, is even difficult in hard science areas like engineering. We can never be completely certain of future outcomes. Sometimes we can only narrow things down with a probability estimate. In more personal decisions, the uncertainty of outcomes can make us behave in odd ways. Most economists assume that decision makers are rational. In the face of uncertainty, though, we don't always behave rationally. Let me demonstrate what that means. Give me a show of hands. How many of you think that, for the most part, you are a good decision maker? It's a UU church. I should have expected that. Now, how many think you are a rational decision maker? How many think that a good decision is a rational decision? Show of hands. Okay, for those of you at home, most people here thought they were a good decision maker for the most part. They also thought they were a rational decision maker for the most part, and it was a little iffy about whether rational is good. So let's put those ideas to the test. I'm going to ask you to make a couple of decisions this morning. Here's the first one. You have two options. You must pick one. The first option is you just get $900. No questions asked, you get $900. That's option one. Second one is you get to play a game that's rigged. In this game, there's a 90% chance that you'll win $1,000. There's a 10% chance that you'll win $10. So, show of hands, who would pick the first option? Sure thing, $900. I think almost everybody. Who would pick the game where you might win $1,000, but also might win nothing? Couple of people. Now let's switch this up a bit. You have a second decision to make. The first option is to hand over to me $900. No questions asked. You give me $900. That's the first option. The second option is to play a game in which you have a 90% chance of losing $1,000 or a 10% chance of losing nothing. So who would take the first option, giving me $900 straight out? I can see who my friends are in the congregation. Now, who would take the gamble of losing maybe a little more than $900, but of losing nothing? Most people. So I'd like to tell you that you are like most people. You are not a rational decision maker. According to classical economists, a rational, risk-neutral decision maker should be indifferent, shouldn't care one way or the other in both of these decision scenarios. If you imagine that you made this decision about 100 times and picked either one randomly, 50-50 percentage, half the average outcome would be $900 in the first scenario, or losing $900 in the second scenario. So as a rational decision maker, as economists define them, both of those alternatives in the decision were the same. But in our case, we generally avoid any risk, any uncertainty when confronted with a gain. We were risk averse. We didn't want to play that game where we might win something against getting a assured $900. When we are attracted to risk, we are risk seeking when confronted with a possible loss. Economists call this irrational behavior because it's inconsistent. Our logic changes based on the situation. Daniel Kahneman, mentioned in the first reading, won a Nobel Prize in 2002 for his work with Amos Tversky on why people choose contrary to what economists like to assume. Neither Kahneman nor Tversky had degrees in economics. So far, we have seen that we rarely have enough information to come up with feasible alternatives, so we wish some into feasibility. And when we predict outcomes, we have weird behavior in the face of uncertainty. If we get to the third step with a set of alternative actions and predictions about their outcomes, we have to then rank them by preference. Now, preference is one of those areas where economists use mathematical axioms to describe a rational decision maker. You might ask, how can you describe a person, a real person, with math? Let me demonstrate. So let's suppose that I prefer oranges to apples. Let's also suppose that I prefer apples to bananas, which I do prefer oranges to apples and apples to bananas. If I'm hungry for a piece of fruit and there is only an orange and a banana on the kitchen counter, which will I choose? The orange, of course. Since I prefer an orange to an apple and I prefer an apple to a banana, it is logically consistent that I should prefer an orange to a banana. You might recognize that as the mathematical property of transitivity. If A is preferred to B and B is preferred to C, then A must be preferred to C. So math can describe a rational decision maker. There's a bunch more of these axioms that economists use. We're not going to go through them this morning. Sigh of relief. But by the way, I know there might be a time when I see an orange and a banana there on the counter, and on impulse, I grab the banana, peel it, and enjoy it immensely. Is that irrational? A further complication in ordering preferences comes with what we will call multiple attributes of the outcomes. Let's say I'm buying a house. We will limit the attributes we are looking at the houses to two, the price and the square footage. Anybody who's bought a house has probably gone through this exercise. I generally prefer lower price to higher price. And I generally prefer larger square footage to lower square footage. Let's say I have two choices. A 3,000 square foot house at $700,000 and another 2,500 square foot house at $600,000. I have to determine what trade-off between square footage and price I'm willing to accept. This gets way more complicated with more than two attributes, and you can actually use math to describe this, and it gets crazy. It's very confusing to sort out preference when you bounce between conflicting preferences over different attributes. The final step is to act on the alternative. Given a list of alternative actions that might include wishful thinking, uncertainty of those outcomes of the actions, and sometimes irrationally behaving preferences, is it any wonder that we end up just shooting from the hip, or we choose to continue to think about it? The final complication in our tendency is our tendency to judge a decision by its outcome. A good decision should have a good outcome, and a bad decision should have a bad outcome, right? But how do you know that you're making a good decision before you see the outcome? Chances are, if you think about it hard enough, you will remember a good decision that ended in a bad outcome and a bad decision that had a good outcome. For example, investing in the stock market is generally a good thing to do. The return on your money over long periods is well above the inflation rate, depending on which index you measure it by. So in general, I think we all agree that if you have extra funds, buying into the stock market is a good decision. Now, if you happen to make this good decision in early October of 1929, you might find that the outcome was not so good. Let's consider the converse, a bad decision resulting in a good outcome. There is a place above Beebe Lake on the Cornell campus where one of the gorges that defines the borders of the campus is very high and the water at the bottom is very deep. I was introduced to this particular site by a friend of mine one beautiful summer afternoon, and I think 1983. Now, generally, jumping off a cliff is a bad decision. Even at 20 years old, I knew this. I stood at the top of that cliff for a long time telling myself that jumping would be a really bad decision, a really bad decision, a really bad decision. I jumped anyway. It was awesome. Being weightless for a couple of seconds, the whump of hitting the water, the refreshing coolness, surfacing and finding I was still conscious with no broken bones. What a thrill. Was this a good outcome? Well, even after 40 years, I remember it well enough to relate it here this morning. By the way, I can tell this story now since my kids are past that phase of their life between mid-teens and mid-20s when the frequency of bad decisions is highest for all of us. So we went through the 4 steps, but where does that leave us? We see a lot of problems in those 4 steps, a lot of challenges. Admittedly, I've posed a lot of the problems, but not really offered any solutions. Now, if you want to sit through 25 lectures at Oakland University, you'll have to register and pay tuition, but there is a class that I teach on engineering decision analysis, which actually has solutions to some of these problems. You may not have the time or the inclination to apply them to personal decisions, but it would be interesting, I think, to see. Those solutions I'll leave to greater minds than mine who have delved into these questions for millennia. Let me give you just a couple of examples. St. Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Society of Jesus, whose members are better known as Jesuits, wrote a guide called The Spiritual Exercises in 1524. The guide was a set of fundamental insights and practical applications to find peace and grace on our path through the world. One section is on what Ignatius called elections, his word for decisions. Even 500 years ago, he wrestled with the same aspects of decision-making I outlined here. One of his practices is the process of discernment, which is really a method for sorting out preferences. For the last 2,000 years, there is a wealth of writings by ancient and modern Stoics, from Zeno and Marcus Aurelius to Massimo Pigliucci, a philosopher and biologist at City College of New York, currently teaching. Stoics, ancient and modern, deal with feasible solutions in what they call the dichotomy of power. There are things you have power over and things you don't. Pigliucci, in his book, A Handbook for New Stoics, kind of the spiritual practices that Loyola had, but updated, offers 52 exercises, some of which help in getting around this wishful thinking aspect. In engineering, we have a saying that a problem well defined is a problem half solved. So, I hope my definition of the problem this morning gets you at least halfway to insight into finding workarounds and accommodations for those blind spots in your own decision making. May it be so. Now, please rise as you're willing and able to sing our final hymn, Morning Has Come, number 1000 in the Teal hymn book.
Morning has come, arise and greet the day. Dance with joy and sing a song of love.
Our service is ended. Let us decide to go in peace, to go in hope, to be a beacon to the world around us. May it be so. Amen.